Well, they
Not vegan.
they do.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee. This is one of 3 area-based committees of Dorset Council, and our remit covers the previous Purbeck and East Dorset District Council areas. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Tony Coombs and I'm chairman of this committee. I'd like to introduce our Officer of Support this morning. Our legal officer is Phil Crowther, and from the planning side we have Kim Cowell, Principal Planning Officer, and Liz Adams and Carrie Woodridge, who are planning case officers. We have Susan Hetherington from Highways, and David Northover is our committee support officer. There are a few wires trailing around the room, so please do be careful of trip hazards. I need to make you aware that this meeting is being live streamed, and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website afterwards. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. I would also like to thank the officers behind the scenes for making this possible. I'm very pleased to welcome members of the public to our meetings to listen to our debate and the decisions being taken, and that they have the opportunity to address the committee directly in accordance with our procedures, which can be found on the Article 4, pages 11 to 14, public participation. David, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies received from Councillors John Worth, Mike Allen and Barry Govinger. Councillor Julie Robinson will be joining us shortly.
Thank you. Members, do we have any declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination? Thank you. You have the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November, which have been circulated in advance and published on the website. Are you in agreement that I may sign them? Was the correct record of the previous meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
So public participation. Can I remind members of the public that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting? First 3 members of the public, including any community or amenity group who are registered to speak, one against the application, including the applicant or their representative, meaning a maximum of 6 in total, will be invited to address the committee on each application. If the applicant or their representative registers to speak, then only the first 2 members of the public who wish to speak in favour of the application may address the committee. MPs need to register in the same way and will count as one of the 6 speakers. Town and parish councils and ward members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee and who wish to address us will be allowed to speak, provided they have given due notice. All requests have to be registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 a.m. on Monday, the 5th of December, and each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. So we have 2 applications on the agenda before us today. Have there been any requests for deferral or withdrawal, please, Kim?
Madam Chairman, no, there have been no requests for deferral or withdrawal.
Thank you. So just to sort of explain how we will go about things, I'll invite the case officer to introduce the
Slightly so as to form a slightly less formal appearance. The semi-detached pair still has a degree of symmetry, as you can see on the layout. However, it's anticipated that with the reserved matters providing appearance at a later date, this would provide the opportunity for individuality that's necessary to accord with the street scene. The original scheme had been refused by officers as being overcrowded, so the quantum of development was questioned by officers, but actually this wasn't a reason for refusal given by the inspector. Rather, he noted that the rear terrace wouldn't be highly visible, and that's been further limited now by the repositioning, so that we've no longer got that central sort of corridor access, which would have given a greater visual impact of the terrace at the back. Terrace is now sort of tucked behind the 2 dwellings, and although there'll be some glimpses potentially across from the bungalow in the chalet to the south, those wouldn't be considered to be detrimental to the character of the area where there's already glimpses of backland development. The officers are satisfied that the proposed layout now offers informality of street scene, so it would avoid the harm previously identified and would accord with policy HE2. The relationship of the application with neighbouring properties was also raised as a concern by objectors and has been a key consideration. Notwithstanding the proximity of the front original, this is the previous refused plan here, this was quite close to to Holly Cottage to the north in the previous proposal, but the inspector found that the development would not vie for attention with the listed buildings and so would avoid harm. The current proposal pulls the dwelling away from Holly Cottage, so you've now got the access in between the two, and would increase the setback so it maintains the view of the flank wall of the listed building. Landscaping is a reserved matter, but it's anticipated that the northern boundary hedge, which appears to be on the neighbouring land, would be able to be retained. The setting of the listed buildings is derived from their grouping and how they're experienced within the high street. And the informal townscape, which has evolved over time, means that new development can be accommodated, provided that it doesn't detract from the listed buildings. And as we've already said, backland development contributes to the setting, and the proposed terrace is sufficiently set back into the plot that it wouldn't be visually prominent or detract from the listed buildings. And that was the inspector's view as well at the appeal. Although design is a reserved matter, so it's not possible to conclude that it's not possible to show you any plans of what the appearance will look like, but it is possible to conclude that the proposed siting and design would avoid harm to the setting of the listed buildings. In terms of neighbouring amenity, the inspector previously found that dwellings could be accommodated without appearing overbearing for Holly Cottage, and the current scheme would move the bit form further from that property, as I've said, so there's an approximate 8 metre separation distance, and Holly Cottage has a driveway along the side of their southern boundary, which would then, so then the new northern access would run alongside that driveway. To the rear, we're going to maintain approximately 38 metres between the new terrace of dwellings and the properties on Churchill Close. At present, there is a boundary fence at the end of this site, which is the southern portion of the site. It's about 2.5 metres high. We're not anticipating significant loss of light to the gardens of the properties in Churchill Close, which are to the west. Concerns have been raised about noise from additional residential dwellings, and we would anticipate, with intensity of development that may occur, but within a residential area, such impacts would not be anticipated to be harmful. Concerns have been raised by the parish council about the loss of 2 bungalows, but there's no policy basis for requiring that any replacements be single storey. The neighbourhood plan is still at an early stage. A draft plan is anticipated next year, so it cannot yet be given any weight. In relation to parking layout, the proposal will provide 2 parking spaces for each dwelling and also 4 visitor spaces shown in red. So I apologise for the error. Paragraph 15.26 in your report where we referred to 3 parking spaces, actually 4. The council's highway team are satisfied that the new access can provide appropriate visibility, and officers considered that the level of parking is sufficient to accord with policy KS12. And then finally, in relation to biodiversity, a biodiversity plan has been provided, and that identifies the need to compensate for loss of grassland to the rear of the properties, as well as loft space to accommodate brown-eared bats and some other mitigation measures that are in your report. The financial contribution needs to be secured by a planning obligation, and that is why your recommendation is in the form of an A-B option. So your officer's recommendation is for approval. However, that requires the planning obligation to come forward. I have no reason to think that it wouldn't come forward, but in the event that it didn't, then you've got a refusal recommendation on biodiversity grounds only. So your officers consider that the latest proposal has overcome the previous reason for refusal by the planning inspector, as the proposed layout is more sympathetic to the form of development along the high street, whilst it optimises the potential of the site to provide housing. The proposed layout and access does accord with the development plan, and the recommendation is therefore approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'm now going to move on to our public speaking element, and my first speaker is Paul Bennett.
Right. Do I need to turn anything on, Madam Chairman?
Please, in the microphone, you should find a button on there. If you just press that, it will switch on.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chairman and members. I'm speaking by reference to my written statement, which has been lodged with the council. My wife and I are the owners of and reside at Holly Cottage, 101 High Street, which is a thatched Grade 2 listed building and lies immediately to the north of the application site. We are objectors to the application and are most concerned that the proposed development could prejudicially affect the amenity and appearance of our property and its setting next to Keystone Cottage at 105, which is also a thatched Grade 2 listed building. It is a great pity that we have not seen this morning any photographs of the flank of Holly Cottage as seen when approached up the High Street. That is a critical view for your members to assess the desirability of the application that's before them. And I do urge that photograph from that view to be provided to them, and preferably that they have a site visit. A previous application for development, as your officers have said, was refused by notice back in 2020 and was the subject, as they said, of a planning appeal, which was dismissed by the inspector, who described the proposed development as detracting significantly from the character and appearance of the area, and, as she said, as being contrary to policy HE2. As a separate matter, there are road safety issues arising from the application which do not appear to have been adequately addressed. The 30-mile-per-hour speed limit is regularly exceeded. The site lies on a dangerous blind bend and is opposite the two developments which she mentioned, namely Elm Gardens and Sheridan Way. The revised site plan shows an overdense form of development, which I submit as inappropriate to the setting. It includes 10 car parking spaces and 4 visitor spaces, all of which are likely to be used, and therefore there will be large areas of hard surfacing and parked cars visible next to those self-same listed buildings. My wife and I ask that provision be made for any application for approval of reserve matters in respect of elevations and materials be the subject of further prior advertisement and consultation, bearing in mind that it's now over a year since the original application was lodged and the original site notice went up. The public need to know and have the opportunity to object to the detailed application, and so that it be the subject of further prior advertisement and consultation and referred back to the full planning committee for determination and not decided by the officers under delegated powers. Those are my submissions, Madam Chairman.
Very much.
I switch the mic off.
The next public speaker is Marilyn Cash.
Good morning.
Should I switch the microphone on? The one with the stalk. Just press the button on the front.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see it. Okay, sorry. My name's Dr. Marilyn Cash. I have the following qualifications: a BSc, MA and a PhD in research. Part of the Sturminster Marshall Parish Council's objection to this plan is based on the following. Evidence work for the neighbourhood plan has shown a need for bungalows in the parish, so the loss of these two properties will be detrimental. But the evidence they rely on are findings from the Sturminster Marshall Neighbourhood Plan Options Consultation Survey, which, although widely advertised, had to have the date extended due to a lack of responses, and in total only 101 surveys were returned. 20 comments were received in response to local housing needs. In particular, these emphasise the need for smaller properties, bungalows or housing for the elderly, housing for local people and affordable housing. However, the 2011 census shows 747 households in Sturminster Marshall. So it could be argued that such a small sample size and lack of demographic data or indication of how many households responded throws doubt of weight of the evidence the parish council gives to the need for bungalows in the village, and it's not necessarily representative of the views held on housing by the wider population in the village. A 2019 parish council consultation found that residents agreed there should be a broad range of housing provision and more affordable housing. Families looking to move home would like to stay in the parish subject to the suitable property. A report produced by ACOM, a company specialising in planning services on behalf of the parish council, found that there should be a mild focus on building smaller dwellings to allow older people to downsize. That is if they want to, because that may not necessarily be the case. And younger people need to get onto the housing ladder. The existing bungalows subject of the application do not meet the housing needs of families, or more importantly, of older people wishing to downsize. They provide what the ACOM report describes as unsuitable housing, which is not capable of adaptation, which can have a negative impact on occupants and their carers. I have personal experience of this when caring for my mother, who was resident in one of the bungalows. Internally, the bungalows are very cramped. The bathroom does not allow room for a carer to provide personal care. This actually has to be carried out in the kitchen. The toilet is inaccessible to anyone using walking aids, meaning they have to rely on grab rails, excavating the risk of falls. The cramped space does not allow easy access for a carer to provide hygiene support in the toilet. The high levels of maintenance and upkeep of the very large grounds, which you've been able to see from the map today, in which the bungalows sit, in my experience, is beyond the capabilities of older peoples to maintain. Bungalows are not necessarily the preferred living arrangements for older generation, who in this day and age are fitter in later life, and as medical research shows, benefit from having stairs within a household. The High Street has seen a large amount of backland development, including the rear garden of a nearby listed building. This has set a precedence within the High Street and supports the Conservation Officer's view that this development would not impact on listed buildings. In fact, the listed building, Holly Cottage, that you can see, has been extended and no longer really retains the fabric of the original Holly Cottage. The requirement for new housing in Sturminster Marshall is extremely apparent, and the site offers 5 well-proportioned homes, ideal for all ages, that would benefit the village as a whole. Thank you.
Very much. Okay, our next speaker is Neil McKeon from Pure Town Planning. Been a bit generous with the other speakers, so I will be a little bit generous with you as well.
Henry. Okay. Good morning, Chairman, members. My name is Neil McKeown from Pure Town Planning, speaking on behalf of the applicant in support of the proposal. As noted in the delivery from the case officer, or speaking on behalf of the case officer, the application follows on from a refused 5-unit scheme dismissed at appeal in May of last year. The inspector's findings have directly affected the revised application before you. The appeal decision highlighted a character of ad hoc development in High Street, including rear of site housing. In response to inspector concerns, a pair of semi-detached dwellings are proposed to the frontage with an altered access drive to the northern boundary, as opposed to the previously central access drive between the frontage units. The 5-unit quantum of development was accepted previously at appeal. The appeal decision confirmed the original proposal wouldn't harm the setting of the listed Holly Cottage, but the siting of the revised units to the frontage in line with the existing, with the repositioned access drive ensuring the listed building setting would be safeguarded. As such, the visual setting of the heritage assets and their group value in High Street will not be harmed, with unobstructed views of the boundary trees which positively contribute to the street scene. The inspector overturned the council's previous objections to the proximity to Holly Cottage and any associated overbearing and loss of light or amenity, confirming the high boundary hedge, the high boundary hedge on would limit this impact. The revised plans sees a greater separation to Holly Cottage than assessed at appeal. Given the acceptance of this previous relationship, the current proposal will see no additional loss of light, amenity or overbearing to Holly Cottage. The rear terrace between 9 and 13 metres from the western boundary and 38 metres to the properties on Churchill Close. No objection to this relationship was raised under the appeal. The specific window positioning and views to neighbouring properties are at significant distances and will be agreed with officers under reserved matters. Therefore, the revised outline proposal respects the amenity and the privacy of the existing and future occupants to High Street and Churchill Close. The existing driveway will be expanded to create a single access to serve the proposal. The parking provision is above the council's standard with additional visitor spaces in order to prevent any on-street parking pressures. The application, as noted, is supported by an EAA and biodiversity plan, with the site plan highlighting suitable private gardens to all units, with additional space for boundary planting and frontage green spaces, again to be agreed under reserved matters with the officers. In conclusion, it's an outline application on matters of access and layout only. Certain comments from the Parish Council's objections in respect to the architectural style, the scale, the visual impact on the landscaping are not directly applicable in this case and will be agreed with officers under reserved matters. The concern of impact upon the neighbouring listed building has been addressed by both the inspector's comments and that of the conservation officer. The outline proposal before you is policy compliant and has secured the support of respective planning, highways and conservation officers. The scheme delivers 5 units in an established urban area earmarked by the council for residential development and builds upon the appeal decision to address the previous officer concerns. The revised scheme utilises the site for increased housing density while safeguarding the character of the area and the setting of the neighbouring listed buildings. With this in mind and the full support of your officers, I ask that you please take this into consideration and offer your own support this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one final speaker this morning, and that's Councillor Sonia Kay, who's Vice Chairman of Sturminster Marshall Parish Council.
Good morning. Madam Chairman, councillors, I've come here today to speak against this application to demolish a pair of semi-detached bungalows and replace with 5 3-bedroom dwelling houses. The Parish Council has concerns over this application regarding its density, style of homes, parking, safety. The only 2 letters of support were from the people who own the 2 bungalows. At this time, we are developing a neighbourhood plan and have reached the drafting stage. One of the outcomes from the survey was that more bungalows are needed to allow people to downsize but stay within the village. We have very few bungalows and need to preserve what there is to create a sustainable community, not a dormitory commuter village. To achieve this, we need a mix of properties which include bungalows to allow older people to downsize. There are many issues with parking within the village. In this vicinity, some properties do not have off-road parking. Although enough parking spaces have been created on site under the Dorset Council guidance, in reality, visitors will park on the road because the proposed are 3-bed houses, with potentially some households having 4 cars. People who live here need a car to commute to work. The bus service has 1 bus an hour to Blandford or Poole, and not all people work in these towns. There is also a safety issue as there is no pavement on this side of the road, and the entrance is situated on a bend, which will make it hazardous to negotiate the junction of the development. There already have been near misses here because of the through traffic and cars parked on the road. Highways have no objection, but it seems their consultation exercises are desktop, not physically going to site. The Parish Council has concerns regarding lack of access also to emergency vehicles to the rear of the site. As was mentioned in the dismissed appeal, all communities need a mix of housing to keep communities viable and sustainable. The proposed development would detract significantly from the character and appearance of the area, but they still intend to develop 5 properties. The density of this development will be overpowering to the street scene. As the bungalows stand at present, they blend in. The back building along this stretch has bungalows behind a bungalow, and this fits in. Due to the density of the development, the landscaping is sparse and lacks cohesion in the street scene, and the properties have small gardens. Following the pandemic, which created health and well-being problems, people need more space within their properties. Can I ask you to think very carefully about this application and the effects it will have on the street scene, parking, safety and landscaping? Thank you for your time.
Can I ask you just to switch the microphone off, please? Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to our officers. Are there any, you've heard quite a lot from our speakers this morning. Are there any points that you wish to reflect on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in respect of the impact on Holly Cottage, the inspector in the report on the previously refused application noted that the proposed dwellings would be set back on the site, and you remember that the previous dwellings were actually further forward than the current proposed ones, such that the prominent side elevation of Holly Cottage remains visible in views along the street. While higher than the existing bungalows, the position on the site would therefore mean that they did not vie for attention in the streetscape. While bold and attractive design, I find the strong contrasting architecture would allow the listed building to stand apart from the newer townscape. So that's just part of a longer consideration of the impact on the listed buildings, but I can confirm that the conservation officer and the planning officers are satisfied that the setting of the listed buildings would not be harmed by the current proposal. Obviously, we would consider that again at the point of which we're seeing the appearance at the reserve matter stage. In terms of parking, I note this concern that people will park on the street. Obviously, as planning officers and as the planning committee, we can only control the elements that are proposed and are before us. So the fact that there are full visitor parking spaces, what we would hope would encourage people to use them. We can't stop people from lawfully parking on the street. We appreciate that people will be card reliant in a lot of situations, although more people work at home at the moment. But the parking provision is considered to be appropriate in accordance with your planning policy. In terms of the, there was a little bit said about whether bungalows are or aren't required. I've already noted that we don't have a policy to require them, and the proposal will contribute 5, and yeah, they are smaller houses to the housing stock of the area, but at the moment we don't have the full details. We anticipate that the floor space would meet the standards required, the national minimum space standards, and that in terms of gardens, they are all provided with a garden and room for cycle storage and parking. And in terms of opportunities for landscaping, we don't have the landscaping details before us, but your officers are satisfied there is sufficient opportunity for landscaping to contribute to the street scene. Stages. Oh, and just to say, the status of the neighbourhood plan is not one. It's not at a stage that we can give it weight to that person. So yeah, so the we have to stick with our Christchurch and East Dorset local plan as being the development plan against which the application needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else from our support team wish to say anything at this point? Okay. So moving on now to members. Robin Cook, you are the local member for the area. Do you wish to start the debate?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, if I may. First of all, can I point out, as you now know from the documents, that I have made a statement within the application itself, but I don't have to point out anything other than predisposition. So I feel quite happy to continue and take part in the vote as and when we get there. Thank you. A lot of what's been said here, I support in some respects, not all respects. First of all, can I say that this revised scheme is a definite improvement on the original scheme that went through and went to appeal. There's a much greater degree of mitigation for the impact on the listed buildings, particularly. So there is certainly an improvement with that. To put it in context, those of you who know the village will probably be aware of this, but this part of the village, the High Street, has seen, a very, very large amount of backland development over the years, from small 2 or 3 dwellings up to probably 12, 13 dwellings. A lot of it does work very well, and there's a mixture of bungalows and houses when you look at it. Sadly, the quantity of houses that have been developed over that time have contributed very little, if anything at all, to the local infrastructure. So each time we get 2 or 3 of these properties built as a backland, we don't get anything to sort of help alleviate things like flooding, which is quite an important issue. We don't get things like assistance with highway matters, such as putting in reduced speed limits, etc. So, you get all this development, which in some respects is good. We have to move forward. In other respects, doesn't really help the structure of the village as a viable and working community. I know we're looking at an outline planning permission, but there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, which you might say to me, well, okay, we can look at these if we get to the reserved matters application. But the things we need to look at perhaps in advance of anything like that, 3 things that come to mind here particularly is the turning head. I don't see any vehicle turning head in that plan. I see the access from the high street, and I see you get to the 2 houses at the front and the 4 houses at the back and the appropriate parking, etc. But any larger vehicles in there, I don't quite see how they're able to turn. So you're up against the issue of possibly reversing out to the high street. And again, the high street suffers from a lot of parked cars. So you've got a double whammy there, coupled with the access to the other development, which is virtually opposite. So I would be interested to know what provision there is or likely to be for the turning head. The other one, the good old chestnut that crops up every planning application, almost everyone, is the question of bin storage. Here we go again. Now, most of us, each time there's a bin collection, probably have 2 or 3 bins. We have the large one for either the recycling or the general waste. We have a glass one, and we have a food waste. So it could be 2 or 3 per household. We've got 5 houses there, so you've got a possible minimum of 10 bins, possibly up to 15 bins. I don't see any mention of where they're likely to be stored. Is there a bin store? So that's one of the questions I've got. It wouldn't be unreasonable to ask for one for 5 houses. I live in a development of 17 houses. We've got a communal bin store, including 1 food and about 10 other bins, and it takes up very little space.
Councillor Cook, can I direct you to paragraph 15.32 on page 26, which talks about bin storage?
Fine, happy with that. We come to reserve matters if we get there. It's been mentioned as well by other speakers. Can we please ensure that the conservation officer is heavily involved in that at that point? Because I think they need to be looking at this again in the light of the impact, if any, now on the listed buildings, to take that into serious consideration. There is no material reason why this can't be granted. I can see that. But I would like to see possibly 1 less property to reduce the development and the concreted appearances is likely to give. Maybe one less property would be helpful. That's really the nub of this. The density, a slight reduction would be good. Contribution to local infrastructure, I don't think we're going to see that. Turning head, though, I think that's an interesting one because I'd like to see how we're going to get over that in conjunction with the highway issues. So thank you very much.
I will get officers to respond, but I do need to remind you that we have to deal with the application that is before us, either grant, refuse or defer. We cannot redesign for a smaller number of units, just as a memoir. Officers to respond to points by Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in terms of flood risk, we have recommended at condition 6 that a surface water drainage scheme be provided for dealing with surface water drainage. Members will be aware that there's no requirement to improve the situation of drainage on the site, but the NPF does require that, and policy ME6 does require that it should be made no worse. So the surface water drainage scheme would be anticipated to deal with any additional runoff from the hard surfacing and the built form created, and it's anticipated that that can be dealt with appropriately at a later date. There was a talk about not getting associated benefits such as reduced speed limits. That would be a matter for the parish council to raise with the highways team if that was a concern and that was necessary. In terms of opportunities for turning on the site, my eyesight's not helping me, so I'm looking at the number on there and I'm struggling to see it, but I think it's so the first point, I guess, is that 5 houses are usually allowed to be served by a private drive without being a problem. And in this case, there is room there for a vehicle to manoeuvre. I'm not saying that it's a fully fledged turning circle that might be requested, but that would require over engineering of the site, which we wouldn't want to see from a character perspective. Your council's highway team have considered the application and considered that the layout works in terms of vehicle. I think there was a mention about emergency services earlier, and the issue of whether a fire engine can get up and private access is one that comes up a lot. That is usually dealt with at the building control stage in terms of if a fire engine can't get to a reasonable proximity, then there are requirements for sprinkler systems, so they have to comply with the building control regulations. I think other vehicles, I think their access is actually wide enough to accommodate something like an ambulance. In terms of conservation officer involvement, yes, they would definitely be involved in any reserve matters application because of the proximity of the heritage assets. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Captain Cook has picked up a couple of points that was concerning me. So if I could go back to that bin collection. I couldn't see on the site where the bin collection is going to be from. I thought I read the report. I've just looked again, but I couldn't actually see it. An area had been marked out for bin collection. I just wondered what was the policy in terms of how our resident has to drag their bin to get it collected, because obviously we're not going to get a refuse wagon off the site because of the constraints surrounding it. It's not going to fulfil the policy of Dorset waste collection with the website laid out, so the residents can have to take their bins to the roadside. But I thought I read somewhere that there was a distance in which you weren't permitted past that.
Do you have any other points that you wish to raise? Well, they're doing a bit of nifty finger work to find out what that distance is for you.
Certainly. The next one is a bit of an easier one. And it's that usual one about adoptable standard roads. And I'm assuming on this site, this wouldn't be adoptable, but it does say on page 28 at 8 that the road service would have to maintain, and I'm assuming that's going to be by a private management company. It's the usual, which is some of this has been officers have I don't particularly like, but I'm assuming this won't be built to an adoptable standard.
Through you, Chair? Yeah, that's correct. It would be a private road, so it would be managed privately.
So, do
you have the answer on the bins?
Yeah, I've got here. I mean, it's the advice varies, but when it says bin storage should be located no more than 25 metres away from where waste collection. I thought ours was 15, but I'm still trying to find it. But most of the advice from the local authority building control, which is what governs it, is that householders should need to carry refuse more than 30 metres to storage areas, and these should be within 25 metres of a waste collection point. And that's the building regs, so it's the building regs that govern it.
You wish to come back, Shane?
So could
Need to know the distance.
Is there a rough idea of what those distances are on slide 14 from the houses to where the waste collection point is going to be, and where that waste collection point is on that map would be helpful.
The waste, so each house has its own bin, can store its bin within its curtilage, and then, as you can see, there's rear accesses to the garden down here. The bin collection storage area is the strip across the frontage here, which make easy access for the bin collection team. And I'm just looking at the distances. Thank you.
So while, again, distances are being worked out, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you. So on page 28, at 6, it talks about the subterranean system. And it says the scheme should be a 1 in 100 event with a 40% allowance for climate change. Should that be a 1 in 1,000 event? Because on page 17 at 8.0, under the list of constraints, it says that flooding risk across the site, and that's two different ones. One is the 1 in 100, and that sits at the front of the site to prevent flooding on the highway, and then to the rear of it is the 1 in 1,000. So in order to future protect the housing on that site, should we it's a 1 in 1,000 event?
So the 1 in 1,000 event is a low risk event, and at present the requirement by as advised by the flood risk management team is that we should be asking for 1 in 100 events.
Yeah, quite right. Got that the wrong way around. So it was the same question, but reverse it. Yeah, thank you.
We have those distances. It means so you have to do two things at once. Go on then, carry.
If it would help, Madam Chairman, is the distances we're talking about just an advisory? So it's not registered as it were. It's an advisory distance, is it?
Under planning, we can't, it's an LHBC distance. So that's under the building regulations. We're looking at it from a planning perspective. So that's, from our perspectives, we try and make sure that they meet the requirements, but that would be enforced by the building regs.
So if it doesn't meet the building regs when they get to that stage, then obviously they won't get to the building regs.
So we endeavour to ensure that the layouts do. So my colleague's just measuring it. A moment. I'll just give the distance.
So although we can help,
Let me just do it. Just say so. Just do this.
Do I understand, Madam Chairman, that even if we approve this application,
It's not
and
dissimilar.
they're not able
Go
to
to the collection point.
conform to that regulation in terms of how far they've got to take a bin, that would mean that the site wouldn't get built out until that can be.
yeah, or they would have to come back with a revised application for the siting.
Thank you.
It's not. No. It's advised. My understanding is that it's. I can't really advise you on the building regs because that's not our remit. It is not uncommon for backland development for people to wheel their bins down to the front. The advisory distance is 35 to 30. In this instance, I believe it's in the region of 50. But that would not warrant a refusal because in terms of private arrangements are in place that are available. The local authority bin collection service will collect the bins. It is for the individuals living in those properties to wheel their bins down their driveway to the front. Advisory distance is 30. It is not beyond people's ability in most instances to wheel them another shorter distance in addition to that. But that is not a reason for refusal because the bins can be collected from the frontage.
Also, anyone buying one of those properties
So know that.
will be aware of the distance before they move in. Is that everything? My next speaker then is David Cook.
Just follow up on the last point. In terms of bin collections, assisted collections are available as well, I understand. Would these properties qualify for assisted collections? If the occupier was, for example, not able to wheel the bin out to the collection point.
I think that they would have to have a look on the council website under the assisted collections, because there are parameters around who is eligible. So my guess would be yes, but that would have to come with a health warning, what it actually says. Hopefully someone might give you the answer in a second, because they're looking at the page. Yeah, so if someone is having difficulty, they then have to apply to Dorset Waste for assisted collection, and then each application will be done on its merits.
Thank you.
Thanks. And then Bill Tribe.
Hello. I'm not sure if this is a question or not, but it's we are looking at a very basic ground plan. And I know this is an outline, it's proposed, and lots of things will be dealt with by reserved matters, but we have found in the past that sometimes the reserved matters, what finally happens isn't what we really wanted. There are no, what's the word, visuals of the impact, the front view of these buildings, or what the design is actually going to be. We have nothing on that at the moment, which is worrying because, you know, a small tweak can make a lot of difference to whether a site is acceptable to the neighbours. The other thing is the general layout, just looking at this layout. I am concerned about this business about the amount of paving or hard surfacing on this site, and can't help feeling that we, in an area which already suffers from sort of surface flooding, groundwater flooding at times, I mean, everyone does, but it is in a river valley, that we are again making possibly far more hard surfacing, which will not absorb water. Can I have a reassurance of what materials may be used for the driveway in? Are they going to be tarmac, or are they going to be permeable? And have we control over that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that's part of the landscaping, which will come through as one of the reserve matters. And at that point, we'll be able to see what is being proposed and whether it's acceptable in terms of whether it's porous or not.
Can I ask what would be acceptable? You must have a sort of your preferred.
I think it would depend on what sustainable urban drainage system is being proposed. They link.
My other point is that the general layout of this site means that there is a predominance of access road going down. And it seems to me that the front gardens or the frontage of the two dwellings at the front are overwhelmingly car parking. And therefore they have no attractive frontage. What you will see is just cars parked up in front of the houses. And I personally, I mean, and I'm sure I'll be told I can't dictate, but one could have changed the layout so that the two buildings at the front had proper front gardens going down to the road, and you had more of a courtyard effect at the back, which would have allowed turnage for a bin lorry or a fire engine.
To remind you that we have to deal with what we have before us. We cannot redesign.
But we could refuse and ask them to change.
You have to be able to have solid reasons for refusal that reflect the inspector's reasons for refusing the previous application, because other matters were deemed acceptable. So you're very limited in where you can go with this one because of the appeal decision. And the landscaping will come forward as part of the reserve matters if this is granted today. I'm going to move on to my next speaker now, Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I noticed this morning in their presentation that on 2 occasions, the officers were keen to stress that no weight should be placed on the neighbourhood plan as it is not yet adopted. Now, I know from time to time reference is made to local plans which have not yet been adopted. They are described as emerging plans. So I suppose the neighbourhood plan is emerging. And sometimes it does seem to me that some attention at least is paid to them. Can at least the officers tell me what the neighbourhood plan does say in connection with this matter? Because I have the sneaking suspicion that it might not be sympathetic to the application before us. I'd like to know, please.
Madam Chair. No neighbourhood plan has been published yet.
Right, so we've got no idea at all of what it says. Okay. And my only other point is that I've said it before and I'll say it again. This committee, this council, I believe, ought to take far more note of what parish and town councils say. And I would refer to the remarks of I think she is the deputy chairman of the local council, the parish council of Sturminster Marshall. I believe that we ought to take a lot more notice of what parishes say, because they are the people and the representatives of the people who have the greatest immediate knowledge of the area, knowledge of the concerns of the area and the needs of the area. Thank you.
We have to deal with material planning considerations, and a published plan is a material planning consideration, and that's where we have the difficulty.
I appreciate that, Jim.
I've listened very carefully to what other members have said about this application, but to get to the nitty-gritty of it, this application overcomes the shortcomings of the previous scheme, and it accords with the findings of the planning inspectorate. And I can't see any reason that has been suggested by other members to refuse or that would stand up at appeal. So I think we've got to cut to the chase on this one, and I'm going to propose that we grant the application, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Shane, you got to speak again. Do you wish to second the proposal?
I do, Madam Chairman. Councillor Dyer beat me to it. Yeah, I think I agree with everything Councillor Dyer said, and I think looking through the report, the neighbourhood plan has not progressed with sufficiently to give a plan. We have to deal with the plan for the program. The East Dorset District Local Plan is the deciding factor on this one. That's what we have to deal with. Applications in accordance with the local plan is in accordance with previous gardening fill within the area. Harm to the local listed buildings is always a subjective view, and the code already has a very mixed style and type of pattern on that particular highway. Highways also have no objection to it, and I'm also frustrated that when we have these outline planning applications in front of us, we don't actually get to see the finished product. And as a member, I can't imagine I'm the only one who feels that, but that's frustrating. It's nice to see the full package in front of you, but unfortunately we haven't skipped that. So yeah, everything I said, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to second the proposals on the table, and taking into account the conditions that are laid out within the officer's report. I think it was a really good report, and so the presentation excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Chuck, you wanted to come back?
The Chair. I'm not totally convinced that this proposal fixes the problems that were identified at appeal. The previous reason for refusal was that the proposal, due to its excessive quantum, uncharacteristic layout and design, fails to respond to prevailing grade and character of the existing street and would be harmful to the local distinctiveness of Sturminster Marshall. And it also fails to take away the opportunities available for improving the character and quality of the area and the way it functions, and is incompatible with its surroundings. And those are the reasons that were given for the refusal. I can't see what's different. I mean, moving one house, instead of having a alleyway between the two, you've now got two together and one around the side. I don't think that makes any material difference whatsoever. I can't see it. So I can't see why this is a different application to the one that was refused as appeal. Yeah.
The officer did a full presentation.
So you have heard the full presentation, that's all I can say. I take your point. However, the matter has been proposed and seconded for grant as per the officer report. No further speakers. I'm going to put it to the vote, please. Those in favour of grant? Four. Those against? 3. So therefore, one abstention. Yeah, thank you. Yes, so just to remind you that what you have voted for, I should have made that clear earlier and I apologise, is that there are 2 recommendations, which I'm just trying to quickly jump to. So the decision to grant is delegated to officers subject to the completion of a legal agreement under section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as amended in a form to be agreed by the legal services manager to secure contributions required for the biodiversity enhancement and gains. Should that not be received, then permission will be refused if that agreement is not reached by the 7th of March 2023 or such extended time as agreed by the head of planning. So that's what's printed in the agenda. So that's what you've agreed to. I've just been given some legal advice that although you have abstained, that's still registered as a vote. So therefore, we will just smooth over that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that application has been granted. We will now move on to our second application this morning. That's agenda item 7. I will just pause for a moment. I'm sure that not everybody wants to hear about fuel solution.
It's hungry.
So item 7 is EFUL 2022-02394, removal of existing canopy, supply and fit of new canopy, fuel dispensers and islands and new offset fillers at Horton Heath Garage, Wareham.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
Karen Waldridge is going to take us through this one.
So this is an application for the replacement of new developments at Horton Heath Garage in Horton Heath. Proposal includes the removal of the existing forecourt canopy and replacement with a new canopy, the provision of new islands and also new fuel dispensers and a new offset filler. The application is being considered by the planning committee today because the council owns part of the site. And for members' information, officers are currently considering a further application at the site for the extension of the shop, which is associated with the business, and that also includes parking and the cycle parking provision. This will also be presented to a future planning committee. The application site is located to the north of Organford and north of Horton Heath Industrial Estate, and just south of the Baker's Arms roundabout on the A35. The site itself is accessed directly off the A351 Wareham Road. So here's the application site, the small red mark there, and the boundary is here. Organford is just to the south here, and then further south we have Horton Heath Industrial Estate. Directly opposite the site is the former Royal Navy Cordite factory.
Surrounding the site, we have some residential development, including a park home site just to the rear. And then if you travel along the A351 further northwards, you will come to the Baker's Arms roundabout on the A35.
Yes.
So the site is currently unused for general petrol sales to members of the public, and officers estimate that it's been in that case for approximately 20 years. However, it is understood that the former owner of the site has continued to use the site for the fill-in of his commercial vehicles associated with his own business, and so the business use of the site hasn't been abandoned. So in terms of constraints, the site is located outside the settlement boundary, and so it's classed as being within the countryside. It's also within the South East Dorset Green Belt, and as I've already said, just off the A351A road. And just for members' information, the area of purple land here is the land which is within council ownership, and that extends into the site to partly under the existing canopy. This is just an aerial view of the site. So we have the existing canopy here to the front, and then to the rear is the existing shop building. And there are two accesses to the site, one to the north here, and this is a shared access and also provides access to the Park Homes site at the rear. There's also a southern access here, and adjacent to that we have an existing bungalow, residential here, and then we have residential here, but also some commercial premises. So we have commercial sales on a forecourt to the north, and MOT testing centre to the rear of that property. So as you can see, the canopy is set back from the road frontage, and actually when you travel up and down the A351, the trees to the north here and to the south screen it well in views. Generally the site's quite level in character, but it does gently slope down towards the road. And so here are just some views travelling along the A351 towards the site. So the top photograph here is travelling northwards from Organ up towards the Baker's Arms roundabout. You can just see the canopy here, and this is the southern access where the van's leaving the site. And the photograph at the bottom here is travelling southwards from the Baker's Arms roundabout towards Wareham. And this is the northern access here, just behind these trees that are carpeted out. And you can just see the canopy here, the existing canopy. And it's just some more photographs of the site access for you. So this is the northern access, which is shared with the Park Home site. And as you can see, the access continues to the side of the shop building on the premises and serves the Park Home to the rear. And this is the southern access. And again, you can see the trees closer to the road. And so there's a small area of grass verge to the front of the forecourt. And just some more photos for you really show that it's a bit closer up to the forecourt. So this is the existing canopy here and the existing shop building to the rear in the white rendered finish. You can just see the northern access and the southern access here. That's the neighbouring bungalow. And then there's another residential property behind these trees here. And again, a photo from the front of the site looking directly at the existing canopy. And finally, just to give you a bit more of an idea of the shop building, these two photos here. So this is behind the canopy. And then at the sort of other commercial uses just to the north of the application site. So the commercial car sales and the MOT centre, which is just behind this. As I've already explained, this northern access here is shared with the Park Home site to the rear. The site also, as well as the existing canopy, consists of the shop building, and then there's an enclosed rear yard. And currently on site, we have the existing canopy, which is a rectangular in shape, below which there are two islands and two pumps, which allows the fueling of 4 vehicles at any one time. Vehicles are able to enter and leave the site from either of the accesses, and we have a small grass verge here. And then here is the existing bungalow, which is also accessed from the site frontage and the shared accesses, and is in a poor state of repair. That is outside the application site boundary. The proposal is to replace the rectangular canopy with a slightly larger square canopy. This will have 4 islands under it and will allow 4 fuel pumps. And that will mean that up to 8 vehicles will be able to fuel at the site at any one time. It's also proposed to have new here to allow HGV petrol deliveries, and no replacement of the underground tanks is proposed at this point in time. So the new canopy itself, and it's so these photos here, plans here just show the existing canopy, which is slightly more rectangular in shape, and the new proposed canopy below, which is square. So the canopy is above the 4 islands. The height of the new canopy has been raised above that that's existing. So to the underside here is approximately 5 metres. This is the minimum height necessary to allow HGVs and petrol delivery lorries to actually access the site through the site. And the raise has actually been required because of a number of former collisions with larger vehicles with the existing canopy on the site. So you can see the slight raise in height here above the roof of the shop. And these plans show the increase in the height of the canopy from the rear of the site. So existing is the top plan here, and then you can see the increase here to 5 metres to the underside. I just want to point out the other application that's being considered by officers currently includes the extension to the shop premises, but also includes a raise in height of this part of the shop premises to match the tallest part of the existing building. As I said, that application will come to members at a future committee date. So I'll just go through some side elevations once I go through some of the other material planning considerations. So the application site itself is within the countryside, and as such, the principle of development is considered in accordance with policy CO of the Purbeck local plan. The proposal itself forms a reuse of existing buildings and structures and a small-scale employment intensification on the site, and the provision of community facility, which is close to existing development and an accessible location off the A251. Officers consider that the proposed alterations are not disproportionate in terms of the replacement structures and would not result in adverse visual impacts on the setting of the site. The site is also within the South East Dorset Greenbelt, where new development is considered inappropriate, apart from in very exceptional circumstances, and where the purposes of openness and permanence of the Greenbelt are retained. For the purposes of the Greenbelt policy, officers consider canopy to be a building, and the NPPF lists the exceptions to new development, which includes the replacement of the building, so long as the replacement is not materially larger and is within the same use as the existing, and also limited infilling and redevelopment of previously developed land, and where there be no greater impact on the Greenbelt. Officers consider that the proposal falls within both of these exceptions to new development within the Greenbelt, with the proposal consisting of the replacement of existing structures and redevelopment of the brownfield site. Overall, whilst there's a slight increase in the size of the proposed canopy, the new development isn't considered to result in a greater impact on the Greenbelt, either visually or spatially, and officers are satisfied that the proposals form an exception to inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. So the site, in terms of impact on the character and appearance of the area, the surrounding sites, although within the countryside, has a slight suburban character in terms of residential development and nearby industrial development and the commercial uses to the north. And officers therefore consider the key impact on character really is associated with the increase in height of the canopy. However, given that the mass of the canopy itself is low, and due to its open-sided nature, it isn't considered that it would result in a significant adverse impact on the general character and appearance of the area. The smaller structures below the canopy, so the islands and the fuel dispensers, are, as would be expected, on a petrol forecourt and have historically had some presence on the site in any case. The NPPF and local plan policies seek improvements in design and visual appearance, and officers are therefore recommending conditions relating to improved landscaping of the site, and full details of external finishes and materials of the canopy and the other structures to be submitted for future approval. In terms of neighbouring amenity, the site is surrounded by residential developments, and it is considered that the intensification of the use could result in some noise impacts on neighbours. However, this has been considered with the background of the existing use on the site and the lack of restrictions that the council currently has on that existing use. And also taking into account the siting of the site on a very busy road and with likely impacts in terms of noise probably being more noticeable towards the end of the day when background noise reduces. Environmental Health have been consulted on the proposal, and they consider it be reasonable to restrict the hours of use of the site by the public and for deliveries to the site by way of condition. So the hours of use would be between 6 AM and 11 PM. It would also match a condition which has been attached to a former consent for the Co-op petrol filling station further to the south in Sandford, and that the Co-op site is in an area which is more densely built up in terms of residential impacts. Officers also consider it be suitable to require details of boundary treatments as part of a wider landscaping condition, and also details of a lighting scheme to be submitted for future approval. So an issue raised by a number of neighbours has been the intensification of use and the impacts on the highway safety on the A351, and particularly concerns raised by inhabitants of the Parkham site to the rear, which share the existing northern access. The application is supported by a transport assessment, which considers the implications of additional traffic that would be generated by the intensified use, and also includes sweat pattern analysis of vehicles who would access and move through the site. The assessment concludes that the intensified use and the related traffic would be composed of visits that are largely bypass trips or visits that are diverted trips, as opposed to creating significant new trips just to access the petrol station. The applicants have advised that a pay-at pump system will be installed to reduce transaction time and vehicle waiting times on the forecourt. And the vehicle tracking assessments submitted as part of the application have identified no constraints with the movement of vehicles within the site. The council's highway engineer has been consulted and considered the conclusions of the transport assessment, and no objections have been raised. However, officers recommend conditions relating to parking and turning and manoeuvring within the site, the provision of a construction method statement prior to the commencement of any works, and also the direction of any lighting away from the highway so as not to cause hazard. And they're all conditions recommended in your report. So other planning considerations include flood risk and potential unexpected ground contamination. So the impacts in terms of flood risk are acceptable, and a standard SUDS condition has been recommended in your report. And in terms of ground contamination, again, impacts are considered to be acceptable. However, an unexpected ground contamination condition has also been included should any contamination be found as works commence on site. There are a number of other issues have also been raised by neighbours, and they relate particularly to fire safety and the storing of hazardous waste at the sites in terms of the petrol storage. These are dealt with under other regulatory requirements which lie outside the remit of the Town and Country Planning Act. However, officers consider that it is reasonable to include informative notes on the decision that guides the applicants to these additional legislative requirements that may apply. So you will see an informative note is recommended in respect of petrol vapour recovery permit, which is likely due to the intensification of the petrol sales, and also other requirements under, for example, the petroleum regulations and hazardous substances regulations. The informative note, an additional informative note is proposed, and that's the wording in front of you at the moment. That's in relation to the additional regulations. It's also considered that extra informative notes should be included above those included in your report today, just advising of third-party rights and consents that would be required should the development progress. So in summary, officers consider that the proposal is acceptable in principle within the Greenbelt and the countryside, and also in respect of all other material planning considerations. And the recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to conditions and informative notes as set out in section 17 of your report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no public speakers on this item. However, one of the local members, Beryl Ezard, was due to speak, but she has given us a written submission, which David's going to read out.
Yes, Chair. Committee. From Councillor Beryl Ezard, saying I am satisfied on the application being granted. However, I approve of the conditions put forward by the Parish Council, especially providing EV charging points and the opening time of the filling station. Thank you.
So, Shane. Alex. You come first as you're more local.
Thank you. I'm not the ward member, but my ward starts 50 yards away from here, so I think I'm local enough. I'm all in favour of reusing this site. I remember buying fuel from here a few years ago, quite regularly. A little bit peeved when it stopped. That the thing to consider particularly is the A351 is continually busy. It's a straight road and continually busy. And the only petrol station along it before you reach Wareham is the one on the other side of the road at Sandford. So the fact that this is on the western side of the road is a great advantage, because it may be able to stop traffic, quite so much traffic, crossing the road to get to the one at Sandford. But as part of this, I regularly go to, not as regularly as perhaps I should, go to the tyre place, which is just next door to this Cribstown. Pulling out and turning right from there is horrendous because of the continual traffic. So I assume that it would be from this as well. Can we have any condition to say sort of turn left as you pull out of this? So that in fact it is a swoop in and swoop out filling station, which would make the road much safer.
I'll go to Susan, our highway representative, to respond to that one.
Yes, hi, can you hear me, members?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Highway Authority has considered the proposal and looked at the forecourt on the site as it is. So I can't see over the monitor, but yeah, there's good visibility there. It's wide access. So we wouldn't want to put or insist that there's any changes to the forecourt in any shape or form. So it's nothing that we've requested at this time for just a left or right turn for that particular area. Thank you.
You're asking whether we can implement something.
Whether we could, as a highways authority, and not, the actual site is fine. It's what happens to the traffic. Whether there is an advisory sign at Sandford petrol station, as you pull out, there's an in and an out, and there's a clear direction to turn left as they come out to go down to the roundabout and back, which makes that safer. I wonder if we could have a keep left sign as on the road directing traffic. I know you'll probably say it's not enforceable or anything, but it's not that the visibility, it's the amount of traffic.
Yes, so you are actually correct in what you're saying. There are signs that would not be enforceable by the Highway Authority, so it's nothing that we can condition for, unfortunately. In respect of the, I don't know if you want me to discuss the traffic flows there, but the applicant submitted a very robust traffic transport statement. Within that, they've given details looking at what was the existing condition of traffic movements on the site, what they propose for future, using the TRIPS analysis for future trip generation on the site. And yes, that has expanded, it has inflated But then if you take the peak flows on the forecourt, that proposal, they sit outside the peak flows on the A351. So we're looking around 1,800 two-way trips on the A351 in any 1 hour. We're looking around 150 movements, so it wouldn't be considered severe enough.
You wish to come back?
As a user, I beg to differ. I have sat trying to turn right in the property next door for 20 minutes. And if somebody does pull out sort of determinedly, the whole of the traffic on that straight stops dead for 10 minutes while everybody sort of readjusts, and it backs up very fast to the Baker's Arms. I have a couple of other points.
Okay, I don't want to promise too long, but please.
Yes, councillor, I'm actually very familiar with the site because I was a common highways officer there for many years. So I actually used to use that road at various times throughout the day and do inspections. So I'm completely aware of the volumes of traffic, but there definitely are some peaks and there are some lapses in the traffic. And also you have the roundabout not too far away, which gives some sort of lapses in the traffic. So no, we wouldn't. The independent land use to the rear of the site. So we're just saying to them that they can only turn left or right, we wouldn't be able to condition that. Thank you.
You had some other points, Alex. I need to move on from that one.
I did. I'm in favour of this proposal completely. The bit that intrigues me is what is the relevance of this bit of council land? Because it appears to be built on anyway. Do we get rent from it? Do we have control of that entrance? Because this is the reason it's come here. Otherwise, this would have been under delegated powers. Can you expand a bit on the relevance of that?
We'll let Phil speak to that one. This is more of a legal question.
Thank you, Chair. Under the Constitution, the requirement is that it comes before you because it's on council land. But other than that, the question of do we get rent or the relationship between us as landlord and the tenant isn't a planning consideration that has any relevance to your decision. Looking at the plans, it looks likely that it was applied for a road improvement scheme which hasn't yet been constructed. That's a supposition. Short is it's not a relevant consideration for you. Thank you.
But you indicated earlier,
I was just going to
David.
Just to point out, Chairman, that I think the best argument in favour of this proposal is that it should reduce the traffic trying to turn right coming out of the existing garage on the other side of the road by the co-op. And it can take an awful long time and cause a great deal of disruption there when that happens. And this should reduce the incidence of that. So having a garage on either side or a petrol station on either side of this exceedingly busy road is much in the local public interest, I would suggest.
Are you going to propose grant?
I'm happy to do so.
David, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. Yes, the question that was asked a minute ago by Councillor Brenton. The strip of land at the front is owned by the council. That's not land that is actually to do with the site at all. It's not part of the site, is it?
Yes, it is. It extends quite a way. I think it's as far as the canopy we was informed during the briefing. So it is quite a substantial area. I know it's difficult to see on that, but perhaps the officer could point out where the canopy lies on that view foil.
It's not overly clear, but you can just see a darker area here, which is the canopy.
They
So
can't, you can't see your mouse.
Oh, yeah, there you are.
So the canopy is darker here. Really goes to the line. But certainly the application, the council owned land extends at least halfway under the existing canopy. As you can see, the sites here, the council owned land extends much further southwards as well. And then we've got areas around the roundabout further to the south.
Okay, thank you.
Jane.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It'll be remiss of me to not bring up the concern that I've got surrounding this application. But what I appreciate in terms of planning terms, we're dealing with what's above the surface. Nevertheless, the fuel pumps that are part of this plan application will be serviced by the underground storage of the fuel. With the information being got from us from the officers, I don't exactly know where those fuel tanks are on this site. We haven't had that information given to us, although it does seem that Dorset Council do own the land, a considerable amount of land on this application site. So I've got a few concerns around those fuel storage tanks and what condition they are in and how old they are. It says in the report there's a claim that it hasn't been used as a petrol station for 12 years, although the owner has been fueling its own haulage fleet, I understand, from those tanks, or one of those tanks. So I do have a concern about land contamination in the future, and how that would impact this council authority, who would actually pick up the bill for that. And I'm not quite comfortable with the conditions, condition 11, which talks about a vapor control permit will be needed, which is a separate legislation outside of our planning considerations. I accept that, but that doesn't, for me, cover the risk involved in land contamination if those fuel tanks that have been lying idle for a considerable period of time are in such a bad state of repair. I've also seen the formative note for application for as a surface works. New fuel tanks would require a separate planning consent. And I'd just like some advice about whether we can actually add a condition to say that before any building was to take place, that a full survey had to be done on those fuel tanks to give us a peace of mind that those fuel tanks are fit for purpose and are not in danger of contaminating the surrounding land. Okay.
Go, you want to come back on that?
Thank you. So the condition of fuel tanks actually lies outside the remit of town country planning legislation. If they need replacement, they will obviously require planning consent to undertake that replacement. But as for their current condition and what would be required to be replaced with, that's governed under legislation outside the planning process. So I have suggested an additional informative note, which is the one on the screen right now, to be added to any decision that lists some of the additional regulations outside the planning process that the applicant would obviously need to be aware of should they be looking to use fuel tanks or replace them, and just to ensure that if they exceed certain thresholds that they obtain the correct consents. And that includes a couple of links, for example, to the Health and Safety Executive, and also hazardous substances links through the government website.
Take your answer, Shane.
It would appear, Madam Chair, from the officer's answer, and thank you for the answer, that the onus falls wholly on the owner of the site and the intended operator of the site. I'm still not comfortable that I've got an assurance that the site will be safe within the future. I still feel that a survey would be needed on those tanks for any building to take place.
That may well be the case, but the point being made is it's outside our remit as a planning committee. Lands with other people that are better qualified to deal with that than us. So there are the additional notes. You wish to come back?
Yes. Again, it doesn't actually ask for a survey to be done, even as an informative.
It's not within our remit. No, we'll strike it out.
Okay.
So, any other speakers? I had it proposed, but I don't have a seconder yet. David?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think in view of what we've heard, I would like to second the proposal to grant and providing all the conditions which seem quite intensive, reading them. I think that as long as all the conditions are agreed, I will propose second the bills.
And to both proposer and seconder, that includes the additional informative notes that the officer has used in the presentation.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Thank you. Okay, so it's been proposed and seconded to grant as per the officer recommendation with the additional informative notes. Those in favour, please. Seven in favour, and those against? Abstentions? 1. Therefore, that application is granted. So moving back to our agenda. Should I get my numbers correct? Item 8 urgent items. You'll be pleased to know there are no urgent items. Even though it was only. So that is the end of the fourth part of our meeting at 11:38.
Disappointing.